I had ESPN on in the background while I was working on some editing this afternoon when the graphic hit the screen with the words breaking news in that specific red banner they only use for actual bombshells. And within 30 seconds, Shams Charania was on camera delivering what one analyst on the panel immediately called, and I'm quoting him directly, the single most surprising in-season trade report I've ever heard involving the San Antonio Spurs organization in the entire post-Tim Duncan era. The topic, according to Shams' own sourcing, which he described as being drawn directly from conversations with multiple front office personnel across both franchises involved. The Aaron Fox is on the verge of being traded to the Golden State Warriors in a blockbuster three-team framework that would fundamentally reshape both the Western Conference title picture and the specific timeline of the Steph Curry championship window. Stay with me until the end of this video, because Stephen A. Smith's on-air reaction to this reporting was so intense, so specific, and so genuinely confident that by the end of the segment, I honestly could not tell whether he was reporting his own sources or just co-signing what Shams had already delivered. Let me walk through exactly how this unfolded in real time, because the specifics matter enormously for understanding why this report landed the way it did. Shams opened the segment by directly acknowledging how unexpected the reporting itself was, noting that as recently as 10 days ago, both the Spurs organization and Fox's own representation had been publicly signaling complete commitment to the marriage between player and franchise. That messaging shifted dramatically over the past 72 hours, according to his sources, after what he described as, quote, a series of internal conversations following the conclusion of preseason that revealed significant philosophical disagreements about how the on-court hierarchy would function heading into the actual regular season. The specifics of those philosophical disagreements, according to Shams, centered on the intended role and playing time distribution between Fox and second-year star Dylan Harper, whose breakout postseason last spring apparently created internal expectations within the Spurs organization that Harper would be positioned as the primary long-term backcourt cornerstone alongside Victor Wembanyama. That framing alone was already explosive enough to justify a breaking news alert, but then Shams delivered the specific trade framework that has apparently been under active discussion between the Spurs, the Warriors, and a third team functioning primarily as a salary matching facilitator. According to the reporting, Golden State would send out a package built around Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, multiple future first-round picks, and additional matching salary to acquire Fox as the direct running mate to Steph Curry for the final years of his championship window. San Antonio would receive draft capital and young player development pieces to accelerate what would essentially become a complete pivot toward building around Wembanyama and Harper as the long-term franchise cornerstones. The mechanical components of the deal, according to Shams, are still being finalized, but both sides have moved past the initial exploratory phase into what he described as, quote, advanced structural negotiations. Then came Stephen A. Smith's on-camera reaction, and I want to be completely honest with you about this because it was genuinely one of the more memorable moments of live sports television I've watched in the past several months. Stephen A. essentially took over the segment from Shams for a solid 90 seconds, delivering what can only be described as an impassioned monologue about why this trade makes complete sense from every conceivable analytical perspective. He specifically referenced the Spurs' collapse in the finals against the Knicks earlier this year, arguing that Fox's brutal shooting performances throughout that championship series fundamentally exposed the ceiling of San Antonio's ability to compete at the very highest level with him as the primary point guard alongside Wembanyama. According to Stephen A., the front office reached the same conclusion internally, and the Dylan Harper breakout during the playoff run essentially provided them with the developmental cover they needed to seriously explore a Fox trade this offseason. The panel discussion that followed his monologue got significantly more nuanced and honestly a little more skeptical in ways I think are worth taking seriously before we get too far ahead of ourselves. One analyst immediately raised the salary matching question, pointing out that Fox is on a contract that pays him roughly $49.5 million this season alone, with escalators pushing that number significantly higher in subsequent years. Matching that kind of salary from the Warriors' side essentially requires them to include Jonathan Kuminga at his newly signed number, likely also Moses Moody, and probably additional pieces on top of that to reach the specific mechanical requirements of a legal trade under second apron restrictions. That's a genuinely expensive package to construct, even for a franchise as motivated as the Warriors apparently are to make a significant win-now move. The rebuttal from another voice on the panel was that this is exactly the kind of asset expenditure that the Warriors have historically resisted making, and the fact that Mike Dunleavy is now willing to consider this level of aggression tells you something significant about how ownership is viewing the specific competitive window still open with Steph Curry at 37 years old. According to this analyst, the practical reality is that the Warriors have essentially 2 more realistic championship caliber seasons left with Steph at anything approaching his current level of play, and if they don't spend the assets to genuinely upgrade the roster during this specific window, those assets ultimately become significantly less valuable in a post-Curry rebuild anyway. Better to swing for the fences right now than to preserve flexibility for a future era that might never actually arrive. Then came what I thought was the most fascinating angle of the entire discussion, when the panel shifted to break down what a Steph Curry and De'Aaron Fox backcourt would actually look like tactically on the court. Fox brings elite downhill speed, genuine playmaking ability at the point guard position, and the kind of on-ball creation that would fundamentally change how opposing defenses have to structure their coverage against Steph off the ball. Curry has spent essentially his entire career operating as the primary offensive engine, even when nominally paired with other creators, but pairing him specifically with Fox would allow him to genuinely play significant stretches purely as an off-ball weapon, catching passes coming off screens and shooting immediately without needing to break down his defender from a standing start. That kind of tactical liberation for a 37-year-old superstar could genuinely extend his elite offensive production by 2 to 3 additional years by reducing the physical demands of primary ball handling responsibility. The counter-argument was that Fox's own struggles as an off-ball scorer, particularly his career three-point shooting numbers, which have consistently hovered in the low 30s across his entire career, create genuine tactical problems for a Warriors offense that has always been built around spacing and off-ball movement. Playing Fox alongside Steph essentially forces the Warriors to accept significant floor spacing limitations on one of the 2 backcourt positions, which fundamentally changes the underlying geometric structure of everything Steve Kerr has spent the past decade building. That's not automatically a fatal problem, but it does represent a significant tactical adjustment that shouldn't be dismissed just because the individual talent acquisition looks impressive on paper. Now, here's my honest take on this genuinely explosive report, because I want to be careful not to just react emotionally to the excitement of the news itself. First, I think Shams' reporting on the underlying Spurs' internal dynamics is probably even more important than the specific trade framework being discussed. If San Antonio has genuinely concluded that Dylan Harper is the long-term backcourt answer alongside Wembanyama, and if that conclusion is now driving active trade discussions involving Fox specifically, that represents a genuinely significant strategic pivot for one of the most respected front offices in the entire league. The Spurs don't make impulsive personnel decisions, and if they're moving in this direction, it means they've done extensive internal analysis that most external observers simply cannot replicate from the outside. Where I have more skepticism is around the specific fit question, because I genuinely think the tactical challenges of pairing Curry and Fox in the same backcourt have been significantly underweighted in the initial excitement around this reported deal. Steph Curry's entire offensive value is built around perpetual off-ball motion within a spaced floor structure, and Fox's specific skill set as an on-ball creator with limited outside shooting reliability creates genuine geometric problems that no amount of individual talent can fully solve. That doesn't mean the pairing can't work. Plenty of superstar duos have overcome initial fit concerns through sheer talent and coaching creativity, but it does mean the actual on-court integration is going to be significantly more complicated than the raw name-value combination might suggest. Where I lean genuinely optimistic is on the defensive end, and specifically on Fox's ability to guard opposing point guards in a way that Steph Curry has historically struggled with throughout his career. Pairing Fox with Curry defensively allows Steve Kerr to essentially always match Fox onto the opposing team's primary backcourt threat, which liberates Steph from defensive assignments that have consistently been exploited in high-stakes playoff series. That defensive upgrade might actually be worth more than the offensive scoring boost, especially in a Western Conference that features elite point guard play across essentially every serious contender. There's also the specific consideration of what Kuminga's departure means for the broader Warriors organizational identity going forward. Kuminga has been a lightning rod for Warriors' internal debate essentially since the moment he was drafted, with legitimate arguments on both sides of whether his specific developmental trajectory fits within the systematic parameters of Steve Kerr's offensive philosophy. Trading him now, right after finally closing his extension over the summer, essentially ends the multi-year internal debate about his fit within this organization once and for all. Whether you view that resolution as a positive or a negative depends entirely on how you evaluate the underlying question of whether Kuminga's ceiling ever genuinely aligned with what the Warriors were trying to build around Steph Curry in the first place. For the specific question of whether this trade actually gets finalized in the specific form Shams described this afternoon, I want to raise one significant caveat that neither he nor Stephen A adequately addressed during the initial segment. Trading for a player on a max contract of Fox's specific structure requires extraordinarily precise salary matching under the current collective bargaining agreement, and the specific mechanical requirements of executing that matching within second apron restrictions create real procedural obstacles that even the most motivated front offices sometimes cannot successfully navigate. If any single piece of the reported package fails to clear the technical requirements, the entire framework could potentially collapse and force both sides back to the negotiating table with significantly different terms. That said, when Shams and Stephen A deliver back-to-back confirmations on live television with the level of specificity and confidence they both showed this afternoon, the historical hit rate on that combination is essentially unbeatable. This deal is happening in some form, even if the specific mechanical details of the final version end up looking slightly different from the current reported framework. Steph Curry is about to have a genuine all-star backcourt partner for the first time since prime Klay Thompson. The Warriors have officially declared their intention to compete for a championship in the immediate window rather than protect long-term flexibility, and the entire Western Conference title picture has just fundamentally shifted in ways that every other contender is going to have to actively respond to over the coming weeks. For everyone watching this video right now, I genuinely want to hear your reaction. Do you believe pairing De'Aaron Fox with Steph Curry gives the Warriors a legitimate championship path this season, or do you think this trade fundamentally misunderstands the specific tactical needs of this particular roster construction? Drop your honest opinion in the comments below. Hit that like button if this breakdown helped you process exactly what just happened on ESPN this afternoon, and please subscribe to the channel because I'm going to be tracking every single development on this bombshell trade until it actually becomes official. See you in the next video.